So, just maybe a little brief reflection on today and even drawing in on what we have experienced. And the two themes, one is being a witness of hope, and two is martyrdom. So, to be a witness is to be able to give testimony, to share of an experience that you have had, right? It is to be able to express in maybe a Christian context the story of an encounter that you've had, an encounter with Christ himself, an encounter with God. So if you call, if a witness is called to a stand at a trial, what do? They tell about an event. They tell about a fact, that which was in accord with fact or reality that had happened to them, and they are able to share that. And we're all called to be witnesses in that right? God, when you're called to give a testimony, you're not telling your story, you're actually telling God's story in you and what he's done in your life. And we have people, saints all around us here that have given witness to the greatest degree possible. But they've given it with incredible hope as well, because as they witnessed and shared their encounters with Christ, so convicted, they were so hopeful that they were willing to lay their physical life down for the experience that they'd had in the past, right? That encounter with St. Paul with Jesus Christ himself led to St. Paul's execution, where his head fell and bounced 3 times, if you recall, and then they have Tre Fontani, the 3 fountains placed there. And today we're going to St. John the Lateran, where St. Paul's skull is above the altar and St. Peter's skull is above the altar in the Cathedral of Rome. But it's this term of even martyrdom has been thrown out a bit here, and it's going to be a theme. Well, this person was martyred this way, this person was martyred that way. Josh and I were walking through a little art exhibit in Assisi, and he's like, wait, is that St. Lawrence? He's getting barbecued, right? Like, there's all these legendary stories, but how do we actually grasp that? It's very, like, for us to think about, how do we grasp that, and how can we actually imitate hope in that way? And I think the biggest question is, what are they hoping for? What is their hope in? It's eternity, obviously, right? It is this hope that there is life beyond this life. There is eternal life. And it's not just a hope, it is an assurance. It is an absolute confidence that there is something beyond what we're experiencing here in this physical reality. None of us would be here if we didn't have some degree of hope like that, right? And I think when we examine the lives of all of these saints, there's one word that really comes to mind for me, and that's perspective, eternal perspective. To have hope, you have to have perspective that this isn't it on this life, right? And the saints just were really good at keeping perspective. Now, encounter helps us keep perspective really well, right? To come back to Jesus and have our hearts burn within us so that we can always remember eternity. But the saints were able to constantly do that. Hopefully we, as future, God willing, saints, meaning we get to heaven, would be able to keep that eternal perspective, come back to encounter Jesus Christ in the Blessed Sacrament, in prayer, in community, in so many different ways, but that we would have that eternal perspective consistently. So, sainthood, therefore, is very much about keeping perspective so that we can always have hope in eternity. Right? The saints were very good at keeping perspective. And if we think about that in our own lives, many of the statues and other things that you see around here help us keep a lot of perspective. We saw yesterday the tomb of the Pope with the skeleton, with the hourglass that was kind of, his arm is out there. And why do we have so many pictures of skeletons and other things in the church? Even St. Francis is often depicted with skulls and things like this in some of the churches that we saw. Why do we think there is so much depiction of like skeletons and death. It helps us keep perspective really well, right? And if we were constantly in the right mindset of perspective, we'd recognize that our life is so finite, so fragile that it could end instantly, right? And that helps us if you knew right now that these were your last few minutes on earth, few days, who knows, right? It would help us to live in a much holier way, hopefully, right? We would want to make those last hours, those last minutes count. And I think that's where the saints, thinking about eternity and that reality of death very frequently, are depicted in that way, and they kept perspective very well, right? And so as we are experiencing encounters with saints and increasingly going to hear about martyrdom of saints throughout this journey, I think it's this opportunity for us to keep perspective so that we too can be witnesses of hope on this journey, but also back home of eternity. Hope, witnesses of hope for eternity, that we would always live out of that eternal perspective that these saints had, right? So the progress of today, or just the agenda of today, to actually go to the original Cathedral of Rome, St. John Lateran Basilica, and some of the things that we're going to see in there, and that is a building of eternity. It is the kind of capital building of our eternal home. It's the seat of the Bishop of Rome, who is the Pope. We're going to see so many things there, but after that, we will go to the relics of the Passion of the Christ. We'll see a thorn that was in the crown of thorns. We'll see one of the nails that Jesus was nailed to the cross with. I mean, that's hopefully going to help us keep some perspective. It's real concrete things. But after that, we'll process and have opportunity to go to the Colosseum. The Colosseum is one of the most photographed buildings in Rome, one of the iconic ones. But what happened at the Colosseum was massive amounts of martyrdom. People who laid their life down with complete confidence in the faith, knowing of the eternity that awaited them. And so this and the Colosseum itself is a relic. It is this monument to the seed of the church. So you're in a privileged place of encounter to renew our eternal perspective. We're in a privileged place of encounter to live out hope, and we're in a privileged place of encounter to keep our perspective. And the idea is that we constantly keep that with us and bring it home so that every day, even when it gets hard or difficult, we go back to our parishes and or we just are dealing with sometimes tantrums at home, little fights here and there, troubles at work, whatever it is, that we're able to remember that eternal perspective and even come back to what we're encountering here in Rome and think about how did these saints provide an example for hope and eternal perspective.